Brian at RealFixes.com. Today we're working on an 04 Ford Focus that has a coolant leak. Now there's a known problem with these, it's pretty common, but it'll probably present with just like an intermittent coolant leak. You can't really see anything real clear until you pressure check it. There's a very common problem on the thermostat housing. There's a little O-ring right here that either goes bad or else the housing more typically cracks, and you'll see it leaking out of a bolt hole. We'll show you that now, how to diagnose and find the problem, and then how to make the repair. Now the thermostat housing, if you come in the engine right here, it's located right down here. Now you can see the little bit of a green there. That's the coolant leaking. Now that coolant, here's the new one. What we're actually looking at is that coolant is puddling right here on this little ledge because it's leaking out of this bolt hole. Pretty simple finding that. You simply pressure test the coolant system and you'll see the leak there. Now what we've found though is oftentimes you've got to go out and drive it and bring it back in, and then it'll leak. If you pressure check it just setting in the shop, a lot of times it won't leak. You have to drive it, bring it back in, and then it'll leak. Pressure check it then. Now to start with, we just take off the upper hose. Get this lower hose clamp off. We can use this little device that gets those clamps off from a distance. You hook up to them and then you squeeze it.
They're on the camera.
Take that coil connector off so it'll be out of your way. The 3 bolts holding it down are number 10s. Got one more hose to get off up here. There's another hose held on in the back side. Now you see we just had to take off the different hoses that were clamped on. There's a couple of tools that might be handy for this. This set of pliers like this allows you to grip that hose and then twist it and get it out of there. And here's that tool that allows you to release the hose clamps from a distance where you can't get your hands down in there. Now here's the 2 thermostat housings side by side. You can see the damaged one. You see how the plastic's just kind of broken away. When we compare that to the new one, now this one has the O-ring in place, but the plastic around that O-ring is good and solid. Going back to the other one, you can see how it's breaking apart, causing it to leak. Now this one has a thermostat in it. The new one does not, so you need to order a thermostat and replace the thermostat as well. To change the thermostat, there's just 3 bolts that hold that cover on. That's how the thermostat goes in. Now to put the new thermostat housing, remember this one sticks down into the thermostat housing. Now notice that little vent valve on the thermostat itself. It needs to be pointing, so when you put this cover over, you'll see that it goes right underneath this fitting for the hose. If you don't do that, you could have air trapped in the system. Need to clean the surface area before you put it back together. Now we're ready to put it back in. Make sure that your O-ring surface is nice and clean and that O-ring is still in place. Now when we take these apart, this is the spring locked hose clamp that comes with it. Those are much easier to put on when they assemble it but the screw down type are much easier to use when you put it back together. So we're going to replace the spring locks with the screw type. Now, a couple of these are easier to put in place before you actually get that screwed down to the head. This way you can get that hose on that fitting, turn your clamp around where it's facing up, and you're ready to go. Now the same thing is true about this lower hose that comes in from the front. Get them all started by hand first. Make sure your threads are in good before you put a wrench on it. Remember, these are steel bolts going into an aluminum head, and you're going through plastic, so you don't need to over tighten all these. Just get them up there really good and snug. Now it's time to refill it with antifreeze. You can just pour it in, but here's a method we like to use. It's the vacuum method. On this you have a device that you actually put down right inside the tank, the reservoir tank. There's a little rubber end on that. You screw it down, it tightens it. And then you hook the suction side up. Now what we do here is hook up shop air to this. Get yourself a 5-gallon bucket of antifreeze. Now the way this thing works, you have to close this valve. That's in the open position. You close this valve. Now this hose on this side, you can see it comes around and has a little filter on it. It goes inside a 5-gallon bucket of antifreeze. Now you close this valve, and then when we push this button, it's going to vent and draw the air out of this thing and suck all the air out of the system. Just so the needle going down. Then the other thing to do is come over here and look at your upper radiator hose, and you'll see it collapsing. So it's sucking all of the air out of the engine, the radiator, on both sides of the thermostat. So it's going to create a vacuum inside there. Once we get down to about 21, 22 pounds, we open this valve, and you'll see the coolant being drawn back into the system. It's actually coming out of this tub. You can see it going down. The other thing to watch then is your radiator hose. When your radiator hose fills with antifreeze, it'll pooch back out. It fills back up. And then you'll notice your gauge is back down. You close your valve and suck some more air out in case there's any residual. You'll notice the radiator hose is collapsing again. Okay. You'll also notice now the reservoir jug is full. Then you're ready to disconnect it. Now this one we actually had so full we need to draw a little bit out of the reservoir tank, get it down to the cool level. The nice thing about refilling the coolant system this way is that it sucks air from both sides of the thermostat, gets all the air out, and then it draws the coolant back in. When you're ready to go, you just start it up. Of course you need to run it, check it, but you should be full of coolant.
That's all, folks.